What's the difference between the freeze response and the fight response? Because they can look a little bit the same in conflict if you're unsure. Leslie Wells, connection coach here. I help individuals work on healing and repairing and having their best possible relationships by looking at issues that may be coming up due to their attachment style. So I look at things through an attachment lens to help them repair and work. Usually a partner is not showing up well in the relationship, or they're struggling with their partner not showing up well, and we can look at attachment wounds and attachment styles and work from there. So there are 4 trauma responses. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And I'm going to have a hard time with all these F's, so just bear with me. So a lot of times the flight and the freeze can look the same if you're not sure what to look for, but there's very different things going on internally, and there's different things going on from a physiological perspective as far as what's going on actually in the body. So remember that all of these trauma responses happen because your brain, your amygdala, your threat detection center has determined that there is a threat. And typically this happens in conflict or whenever there's a disconnection in a relationship. Remember, the brain does not distinguish between a real or perceived threat or a present or past threat. And so whenever there's a disconnection or a conflict in your relationship, typically people will go into one of these trauma responses, and a lot of times it depends on their attachment style. So you'll see avoidance a lot of time go into either flight or freeze, particularly the dismissive avoidant. So whenever you have a flight response, your body is activating for movement. Your body is actually ready to do something. So most people are familiar with the fight response when somebody's body is gearing up to fight the threat, to fight the attacker. Whenever there is a flight response, your body is still gearing up to move. Your muscles are getting ready, your heart rate is increasing, all of the things that your body needs to do physiologically to get you ready to move and to move quickly. But the difference in the fight response is that your body is getting ready to move away from the threat instead of moving to attack the threat in a fight response. So flight is all about moving to avoid, to run, to escape, to get away and put distance between you and the threat. Whereas the freeze response is where your body is like, okay, there's nothing that I can do here. There's no point trying to fight and go after the attacker. There's no point trying to flee or avoid or escape. Like, there's nothing that I can do. And so your body just sort of goes completely immobile and shuts down and is like, I'm just going to prepare for death. There's no way out of this. And so all of the parts of your body physiologically start to slow down, and chemicals are released to help you not feel pain as much, whether that's physical pain or emotional pain. So in freeze, your body is in a state of immobility versus getting ready to move. The good thing with a freeze response, and they've actually done studies to show that in a freeze response that sometimes if there is time to deal with the threat, that when you're in a freeze, it gives your brain sort of a minute to shut down and scan your environment and then be able to determine what to do after that. But whenever you are in a freeze response, you are far more disassociated and detached and just sort of away from your body. So one is an activating response, and that is your flight response. And then the freeze response is a deactivating response. Another major difference is what's happening internally as far as internal dialogue. Whenever it's a flight response, there's a lot of thoughts going on, thoughts of getting away, escaping, like not feeling safe, anxiety, panic. Whenever it's a freeze response, the thoughts are like not there. It's more of a numb, there's no thoughts, there's a lot going on. So let's talk about what that actually looks like in conflict so that you can recognize it in somebody. So if you have an avoidant and they go into their flight response, what this might look like is them getting a little bit defensive, pushing back. So remember, they're trying to flee the conflict. They're trying to get away from it. So there's a couple ways they might do that. They might do that by getting defensive back, to push back, to avoid the conflict. They might do that by like getting up and physically walking away, or sort of tuning you out, but they're still there in their head. They still have thoughts, but they might just tune you out. They may try to come up with solutions and try to fix the problem to appease you, to avoid the conflict. They may de-escalate you by appeasing you, by doing a little bit of a fawn response to appease you, to just completely get away from the conflict and brush it under the rug. They may do things like try to speak facts instead of feelings. If you're bringing them feelings, they may sort of reroute that to facts to get away from the feelings, because the feelings are overwhelming to them, and that's one of the things that they're trying to flee. They may give you the good old calm down, or try to calm you down rather than hear you out and actually address the problem, because they're, again, trying to avoid the problem and the conflict. And you may even see them, if you look at their body and their body language, you may even see them like physically retreating and pulling back. And those are all things that you will see with someone who is going into a flight response. It looks very different when someone is in a freeze response. When someone is in a freeze response, they are like completely disassociated, shut down. It's almost like they're not there. So they may not be able to comprehend what you were saying. Dismissive avoidance especially are very slow processors. Whenever you come at them with something and you're talking fast and you're processing fast, they tend to shut down and like their brain just goes numb. They may need to ask you to repeat yourself several times because they're really struggling to catch up. The thoughts are not there. They may have a hard time following along. They may just ask you to say things repetitively so that they can try to catch up. They very much have a hard time staying focused. It's almost like their brain is just gone completely blank. So in them, you will see lower energy, a little bit of slowness. They may seem to really lack emotion, and they may, whenever you ask them a question, they may be like, I don't know. And they may just shrug their shoulders and sort of blow it off. And they're not lying in this moment. They really do not know in this moment. In this moment, when they're in a freeze response, and again, this is a trauma response, they're going into it subconsciously. They cannot control this. When they go into that response, they truly do not know at that time. Like they cannot go into their brain and find a thought and pull it out and give it to you. So if you ask them how they're feeling about something and they say, I don't know, they truly cannot access that data at that time when they are in a freeze response because their body has just shut down and told them that there's no way to proceed forward and there's no way to escape, and so it just stops. So these are two trauma responses you typically will see in avoidance. So if you have an avoidant partner and you have a conflict or you have something going on and you start to notice these things in them, then be cognizant of that and give them space and take some time until they can get out of that trauma response, because you are not going to get anything accomplished if you are trying to resolve something while they are in a trauma response. Part of what I do is I help the clients that I coach find ways to work with their nervous system so that they do not go into these trauma responses, so that they can avoid these trauma responses or come out of them more quickly and recognize when it's happening. And that takes a lot of nervous system work. So if this is something that you would like to work on a little bit better, this is something I do with my coaching clients.